Yasyon Meshanimeshapyam Chakata Pralayodayao Tam Shakti chakra vibhava Prabhavam Shankaram stuma Yasyon Meshanimeshapyam Chakata Tam Shakti chakra vibhava Prabhavam Shankaram stuma. Much better. Just to come back a little bit to this first Mangala verse. Apart from the many, many other meanings which are there in the commentaries, it is clear that every one, especially such a dense verse, has several levels of meaning. So the apparent, if somebody listens to it for the first time, it thinks it concerns the cosmic creation and destruction. But this is also one level. But, as we have seen before, the deeper level is, of course, the consciousness, what is happening in consciousness. Now, regarding this cosmic Pralaya Udaya, it is something, it just struck me as an example of how this consciousness is still there in the Indian people. I was present in Orissa when there was a super cyclone and tens of thousands of people were killed. And after that, I was in the middle of it, and then you experience it so directly. Then the people, how do they understand this kind of catastrophe? And one farmer who was from the coastal, he just survived. His whole family was swept away by the sea, and his whole village, fields, everything was destroyed. And one Oriya journalist, not a journalist, a sociologist, he asked the people, what does it mean, this destruction? And that farmer said so beautifully, when I read it, I was really in tears. He said, how can the world end so soon? It has just begun. I mean, what a consciousness, this illiterate farmer, this consciousness of this cosmic cycle, this world is coming to an end, it has just begun. So this is also, it keep in the background, this cosmic cycle of creation, destruction, and whatever is going on in this world. All the time going on. It's not just one pralaya and then everything will be finished, but there are so many pralayas, and so many udayas, so many new beginnings, so many new creations. So this is also a level which is very much true, and which is also very much in the Indian psyche, that this is a constantly going on cycle. But then if you go deeper into in yoga, in meditation, what does it all mean at the consciousness level? Then you come to those meanings which we have seen before. And I just want to add two more meanings maybe to this Shakti chakra from the Spanda Sandora. Very briefly, you don't have that text, where one meaning is that the Shakti chakra means the host of mantras and mudras. Now in the field of yoga, mantras and mudras are also considered as deities, as Shaktis. Its power is the capacity to realize the triple yogic accomplishment. Its source is the locus of its repose, and from whence it arises, both of which are implicitly indicated by the word source, prabhava. And the other meaning, which is also connected with the yogic meaning and which will come in the later part of the text, The power of the wheel of energies, as explained, is the power of mantra. Now, of course, Spanda has very much to do with mantra and with speech, with the word in general, because there is no sound without vibration, and it is quite understood, and especially mantra. Of course, the power of mantra is its power of Spanda. The power of the wheel of energies is the power of mantra. It generates the light and brilliance which shines in the adept's mind and blows, moves, attains, presides over, perfumes and destroys, in the sense that it brings it to rest within his own nature. What all mantras are doing, it's incredible. It moves, attains, presides over, perfumes and destroys, in the sense that it brings it to rest within his own nature, means the nature of the adept, and so on. And another meaning of this verse, in another sense, Shankara is the source or arising of the teacher who possesses power by virtue of the wheel of energies, which includes initiation, grace, the realization of the deity, who is the object of the yogi's meditation, along with the wealth of other powers. So here, it is the guru who is the Shankara is the source of the arising of the guru who possesses that power, that wheel of power. So you can see there are so many levels of meaning of the same verse, and in this respect I want to explain something which again recently we have been discussing in Shimla, Alexandra. In the Indian tradition, I have spoken a little bit about Sutra. There are different degrees of texts or categories of texts which have different power. Apart from the revealed texts, which are the agamas, or whatever you may call it, tantra and so on. But as we said yesterday, Sutra is always the original text which has some human author. But then come different categories of interpretations. And the shortest category of interpretation of Sutra is vritti. I'm going to write it. This is just a brief explanation of what the Sutra says. And then come the other commentaries in different degrees. Vivritti, Vivarana, Pashya, and so on and so on. Now, what is interesting, the Indian tradition, especially this Kashmir Shaiva tradition, they are so conscious of what is going on in all these texts. They associate these levels of the texts with levels of the word. See, what we're doing here, we are using language. We are interpreting language. We are expressing it in words, vaikari. But these words and this language and these texts should lead us beyond the word, ultimately to silence. So the whole Kashmir Shaivism has developed this teaching of the 4 levels of the word, 4 levels of speech. Hara is the transcendent source of language, source of the word, which is beyond language, beyond thought, beyond everything. That is the source.
It's the Triyatit basically. Triyatit. Triyatit. It's a Triya.
Turiya, yeah, but yes, there are so many degrees of 4 which Turiya is, corresponds to Turiya. Pashyanti is the level of the word which is not yet expressed either in thought or in words or in language. It is the purely intuitive level. It's like when a poet has a sudden intuition, but has not yet formulated in his mind. That is Pashanti. A sudden insight, which is just between the transcendent and the language. It is just in between. And then when it comes to the level of thought, because in thought we already use language, that is called Madhyama, that is the intermediary level of language. And only in the lowest stage it comes to the spoken, uttered word. Of course, spoken is always more important than written. The written word is always secondary in the Indian tradition. Vaikari means also the embodied one, which uses the vocal organs, the body, to express. Now, what is interesting is that, of course, Para is beyond, but they have associated Sutra with the level of Pashanti, which means that at this very beginning, original expression, and Karika belongs to the category of Sutra, it is very close to the source of the word, to the transcendent source. And that's why Sutra uses a minimum number of words. And you know that what the Pandits say, Ardha Matra Laghavena, you know this? Ardha Matra Laghavena, Putrotsava Iva, Manyante Mayakarana. The grammarians, they rejoice as much about reducing one syllable as about the birth of a son. Because they want to express it in the briefest possible way. Because the briefer, the closer you are to the source. We use so many words for saying nothing sometimes. But the more you come to the essence, the briefer your speech becomes. And Madhyama corresponds to vritti. And Vaikari to all kinds of other commentaries. Which are more explicit and more extensive.
And Agamas corresponds to then Para. Agamas.
But Para is beyond,
Agamas that is between the Para and Pashanti.
Well, Agama comes from Para, of course. Because it's not a human, there's no human author.
So it was always revealed.
Yes. Now, why I'm saying this, because these Kārikas also, they have a greater power. They are so brief, and in that brevity they have more power and more, of course, possibility of being explained in so many different ways. Now, we do have a vritti to the Kārikas, Spanda Kārikas, and that is by Kalata, the direct disciple of Vasugupta. So Vasugupta is the author of the Spanda Karika, and Bhatta Kalata is his direct disciple, and he must have been a great sage also, and great, because he is quoted always with the greatest respect. So his vritti is that which corresponds here to Madhyama. So the language at the level of thought is still more concentrated, and the moment it is spoken out and it flows out into multitude of words and so many explanations and so on. But the purpose is, in the texts and in the practice, always to go back from the many words back to the simplicity, and the ultimate simple word is of course the mantra. The monosyllabic mantra is the ultimate abbreviation of language, which is sometimes really placed at the level of para. And so to lead back, as Padu says so beautifully at the end of his book on Vach, he says ultimately it all leads back to silence. So that's why this whole connection between our studying the text and sitting and meditation and so on, because it has to lead back to that source of the word. Now the sutras are so, sutra here means the Kārikas, are so brief, and you will be surprised that the title is Spanda Karika. You have to go on searching to find the word Spanda. So the first time the word Spanda comes in the Karika is in verse 22. And that too in a very, very interesting context. We are going to read it later because I don't want to jump now. But in a very experiential context, not as a kind of philosophical definition. Now we are going to define what is Spanda. No, not at all. It's just in a context of experience. And an experience which comes very close to what we did last year on the Vijnana Bhairava. Just that moment in which something happens, and that is Spanda. But not before. So before, you can see he's going round about and building up the whole background and so on. So it's not so direct like the Vijnana Bhairava. So those who are not familiar with Kashmir Shaivism, they need a little patience to go through these verses which are a little more, I wouldn't say theoretical, but still it becomes more and more practical as we proceed. But that background has to be built up. So we come to the second Karika. And why I say this, because at the level of Pashyanti, these multiple meanings are possible. So every verse can have, as we said before, the first was related to the cosmic creation and destruction, or to the inner consciousness, and so on and so on. So many different levels. So also the second verse.
Page
24. 24.
Page 24, yes. Yatra sthitam idam sarvam karyam yasmacha nirgatam tasya anavrita rupatvat nanirodhosti kutrachit. Now, again, this is typical of a sutra, because he doesn't say yatra means in which. It's just all these relative pronouns, in which, in what. Probably in Shankara, who has been mentioned in the first verse. Yatra, in whom, or in which. Sthitam idam sarvam, all this is established. See, I am a very stingy translator, because whenever I translate, I don't add words, or if it is necessary, only bracket. Now, Jaidev Singh, who is a great friend of mine, his weakness is that he goes on adding words to make it more. But these words, you have to put it in bracket, because there's no question of Spanda here. But he puts sometimes the words from the commentary into the text. Well, here he doesn't do it, but in other places he does. Well, in his translation, inasmuch as nothing can veil his nature, there cannot be his obstruction anywhere, in whom all this world rests and from whom it has come forth. And Mark's translation, again in Mark, I have cut him out the creation. He says creation, which I don't like. That in which all this is established, and from whence it arises, is nowhere obstructed, because it is unconditioned by its very nature. See, creation already limits it to one act of the 5 acts, first of all. And then it is such a typical expression in Kashmir Shaivism, idam sarvam, all this. All this means the whole universe. You don't need to add anything, either creation or anything. All this. This means, idam means to which you can point as an object, the objective world. And you have the 2 poles. There are only 2 poles in the whole universe. That is idam and that is aham. And everything is a combination of the 2. One or the other is predominant. Aham means subjectivity, idam means objectivity. And now the whole world is an expansion of aham into idam, and then idam, aham combination. These are different stages, different levels of manifestation. So idam, this, just this. Aham.
So that is the manifestation.
Manifestation.
And
manifestation.
Aham is the supreme, the consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. Now, this verse has, of course, philosophical implications and spiritual implications. Now, the philosophical implications is that to see, the style of the commentators is always they introduce a verse by saying the possible objection to the previous verse would be that, and then the answer is in the following verse. So the possible objection is this: here a doubt may be raised. What is the proof of the existence of such real nature as Shankara? How can he create the world without any means, such as material, etc.? Because they are arguing against the systems of philosophy which presuppose a material cause of the universe. So, and this doctrine is based on a pure Svatantriyavada, means the total freedom, total independence, independence also of any other cause. So this is one of the philosophical reasons for making such a statement. If it be said that there can be both, that is the doubt raised, there can be both appearance and disappearance of the Lord, then this would give rise to difference in his nature, and so on. And there would be contingency of duality. To remove all such doubts with one stroke, the author says. So one philosophical doubt which has to be removed is that there is no other cause, no material cause or any other cause, but everything is contained in that reality. Of course, Yatra, we have seen what is Shankara. Shankara is our very own innermost nature. So it is again not simply a theistic statement. But we are more interested in the spiritual implications of this statement, which are very great. And this verse is often quoted. You know, when the doubt arises, you know, there are so many obstacles. How can we realize the divine? How can we, you know, there's so many things obstruct us, and so on. So to immediately remove this kind of doubt, which is a spiritual doubt, this verse is quoted. There can be no obstruction whatever. Just that one phrase is quoted in such cases. Tasya anavrita rupatvat na nirodhosti kutrachit. because there is no obstruction anywhere. Now in the commentary, yatra. Now this is very typical also of these authors, these very brief statements that to use just this relative pronouns. There's this one beautiful verse which is commented upon by Abhinavagupta in the Paraprishika Vivarana, and the verse comes from the Mahabharata. Yasmin sarvam yata sarvam yas sarvaha sarvadaschaya yascha sarvamayo nityam tasmai savatmane namaha. In whom everything is, from whom everything comes, who is everything and everywhere, who is immanent in all things, eternal, him, the self of all, do I adore. So it's all the cases of Sanskrit grammar. In whom, from whom, who, etc., etc. So all the possible relationships, you know, it's just relative pronouns. And then Abhinavagupta goes on commenting on every single part of this. Yasmin sarvam, he goes on pages and pages. Yata sarvam, and this is beautifully expounded in the Paraprishika Vivarana. That would be a text to teach, but that requires more than a week. So this reminds me, this yatra, the same kind of expression, in whom or in which. So yatra means in that consciousness which is one's own self, as it had been said before, Shankara. Idam sarvam karya means the entire world consisting of subject or knower, means of knowledge or knowledge, and object or the known. Yatra sthitam idam sarvam karyam therefore means in which consciousness this world consisting of subject, object, and means of knowledge, etc. rests. By rests, sthitam is meant by whose light it comes into light and thus obtains stance. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sthitam idam. It is established because nothing is established according to this philosophy and spirituality which is not shining in that light, prakasha. Tato ayam chit atma bhagavan nicharas. This is another. Sorry. I marked it. And this verse is even also a kind of answer to, in the Shiva Stotravali of Utpaladeva, we find some verses which are critical of yoga. Anka, you remember? Because there Utpaladeva says, well, the yogis, they think only when they're in samadhi, then only they are in that state. But otherwise, if they're out of samadhi, what happens? And here also it's a little criticism, you know, that this state is not dependent on anything, not even dependent on any pranayama or samadhi, or it is always there, it is always established. And it is a completely different attitude than, now I have to do so much of meditation on pranayama and this, that, and then only No, it is always there. It is always established, ever established. And it makes a lot of difference when he quotes from the Acharapamatrisiddhi of Uttaradeva. How can he be checked by prana? Because he is identical with it. Even prana is also nothing but that, in which everything is established and so on. So it's not by pranayama or by any breath control that he can be pranena yantrana. Sada atmana eva tasya syat katam pranena yantrana. It's that illusion which yogis sometimes have, that because they are doing a certain practice and then through that practice they will reach a state and so on. But he says, no, there is no object, there is no reservation, there is no obstacle at all in any condition. And that's the whole purpose, of course, of that whole spirituality, to reach a state of consciousness which is not bound to any particular practice or any particular which can be applied at any time and any condition, any situation, and without depending. It doesn't mean that one shouldn't do pranayama and asana, whatever, that there is no objection to it. But one should not think that this state depends on these practices. That's what he quotes from the Acharapamatrisiddhi. Then there's a question about, he goes on raising objections and answering to these objections. Now, in whom it rests, yatra sthitam idam sarvam. And here he quotes that beautiful verse from the same Paradrishika Tantra, which one of my favorite verses in the whole tradition. Yatanya Groda Bijasta Shakti Drumo Mahadruma Tata Hridaya Bijastan Jagat Etat Characharam. It's a beautiful verse from the Paradrishika Tantra. As the great banyan tree lies only in the form of potency in the seed, even so the entire universe with all the mobile and immobile beings lies as a potency in the heart seed of the Supreme. Now this heart seed, Hridaya Bija, the seed of the heart, is actually, technically, it's a mantra. The seed of the heart, Hridaya Bija. But it can be, it has been always interpreted like that. But the point is here, because we're speaking of Shakti, the tiny seed of the banyan tree has the potency of producing that huge tree with all its roots and which can give shade to so many creatures. And in the same way, that smallness is emphasized. The small seed can produce that huge tree. In the same way that one seed of the heart, which is this heart mantra, it can produce that Hridaya Bijastam, that power which holds the whole universe. So here he doesn't go into the meaning of the mantra, this only because I know from the interpretation. Because it already exists in the Lord's self, this world already rests in him, gleaming as identical with him. Therefore it is perfectly valid to say that the Lord, whose nature is consciousness, brings about the emergence of the world in the form of congealment of his essence. Now this is an important expression in Sanskrit. Nija Atma Bhagavan Nija rasa ashyanata rupam. And here maybe we are coming, I have been avoiding to define what is Spanda, but maybe I have to say something here. If everything is divine consciousness, or is that ultimate consciousness, then what about the concrete reality? What about the matter? And according to this system, the matter is just a kind of crystallization of consciousness. And not only of consciousness, chit rasa. See, rasa, of course, is always something liquid. So as you produce a sugar crystal out of liquid, the juice of sugar cane, or ice from water. So in that same way, this matter is a crystallization of the essence of consciousness. And this comes, there's a verse in the Yoga Vasishta which is Ashyanam chitrasasyogam sakaratam upagatam, and so on. So the consciousness has assumed solid form as a congealment or as a crystallization of that essence, chitrasasya aukam. Now, if we talk of Spanda is a very extremely subtle experience. I am not calling it now reality, because although it's called Spanda Tattva, but Tattva in the sense of, he translates it as principle. So the very subtle essence of Spanda, which is experienced as it will be described later in certain states and certain conditions. But that same Spanda is also materialized in concrete form. And that, I am now taking something which will come later, but I think it's important. One is called the universal Spanda, Samanya Spanda. Universal Spanda is that which is underlying the whole of reality. And it is of the nature of consciousness. It's purely consciousness underlying everything, but unmanifest. And it becomes manifest by this kind of congealment or crystallization as Vishesha Spanda. Vishesha Spanda, now when it assumes the form of this book, it is also Spanda, but in a concrete, a crystallized form. So the difference philosophically is very important between Samanya Spanda and Vishesha Spanda. And so it is not denying the material reality, but that material reality is just a concretization of the, we can say, the spiritual or the consciousness. Thank you, it's much better. And this is very important also, there is no duality between the spiritual and the material and so on. But the material is just a concentration of the concretization of the spiritual. And that's why through the material again we go back to the source, which is the Samanya Spanda. The more subtle you become in your meditation, in your sadhana, the closer you come to that Samanya Spanda, to that vibration of consciousness which is all-pervasive, which is universal. Universal Spanda and the particular Spanda, it's also called. So here that theme has already come up, the condensation of consciousness in Then he goes on and on and on. But there is another objection. It may be granted that there is no obstruction to him by the world in the states of manifestation and maintenance. How can he avoid being concealed in a state of the world's dissolution, which is of the nature of nothing, akin to sound sleep? Without the perceptible world, the perceiver, the perceiving consciousness is nothing. Then the reply. There is no annihilation of it in the form of a void. In accordance with what is said in the verse given below, the void cannot be reasonably conceived without light serving as its support. And then he quotes the Svachanda Tantra. It is really non-void, ashunyam, which is said to be void, shunya. And the Svachanda Tantra has a very interesting long passage on shunya. And Svachanda Tantra is not a philosophical text, so in other philosophical texts, of course, they discuss with the Buddhists what is shunya, what is ashunya, and so on. But Svachanda Tantra is one of the Mula granthas, Mula scriptures. And it's very interesting. And there are 6 or 7 stages of shunya as levels of spiritual experience. And at the end, he says, but there is even in Dharmakirti, there's a similar expression. Shunya means actually ashunya. Ashunyam shunyam iti uktam, shunyam cha bhava uchyate. That which is said to be void, shunya, is really non-void, ashunya. For shunya only means abhava or absence of objects. O goddess, that is to be known as abhava, in which all objective existence have dissolved. Therefore nothing, whether space, time or form, can be said with propriety to obstruct him, whose work is this whole world, by whose light it is manifested, and even when dissolved it abides as identical with that light. Now, Abhinavagupta has one of his beautiful hymns, Anubhava Nivedana, the offering of experience, where he speaks of shunya, ashunya, I have it here. He is beyond void and non-void. It's very beautiful. He is beyond void and non-void. And he speaks not of a theological concept, but of the experience of the yogi, beyond void and non-void. So that whole relativity of this language also, often in discussion with the Buddhists, but also within their own system, because shunya is very much, we have seen last year in the Vijnana Bhairava, there are so many meditations on shunya as an experience in different contexts, in different situations, etc. And then this very typical expression of our authors. They say, in Indian philosophy you have the 5 pramanas, the means of valid knowledge. And then he says, what can these poor means, he always has an adjective, these poor fellows, those means, what can they prove? They cannot prove anything which is not in that same light of consciousness. Whatever you're proving, you use that same light of consciousness. So they are just poor fellows. They cannot serve the purpose to prove anything. Hence, this principle is all-pervading, eternal, full of all powers, self-luminous and eternally existent. In order to prove its existence, no poor means of proof which can reveal only an unknown thing can ever be appropriately applicable or possible. And so on and so on. Now, what is important for us, of course, most important for us, is the spiritual meaning of this verse. Since there is no obstruction to this, those who have the book on page 30 bottom and 31, there is no obstruction to this Spanda principle is, Khemaraja says, whether in the state of cessation, as indicated by the phrase yatrastitam, or in the state of expansion, as indicated by the phrase yasmat chanirgatam, therefore the yogi should be intent on entrance in his essential nature in both nimilana and unmilana samadhi. And this is the yogic meaning, that both in samadhi with closed eyes and open eyes is just an external description, but what is actually the experience is more than that. It's more than just closing and opening the eyes, because opening the eyes is very easy, but if you are in that unmilana samadhi, it's a very, very high state. It's a very high state. And then, of course, he quotes, he falls into the temptation, which I am also in, to quote the text a little further ahead. When agitation ceases, then occurs the highest state. That is one of the most famous phrases of the Spanda Karika. Yata shobha phaliyata tadasyat paramam padam. Similarly, whether it is a word or object or thought, there is no state which is not Shiva. There cannot be an obstruction to or negation of one's real nature in any case, even though there may be existing somewhere an experience and so on, who maintains there is no self, so that is against the anatmavadins. But because it is this Lord who is one's own essential nature is Adi Siddha, means ever established from the beginning. Thus, the reality of the Spanda principle has been tacitly affirmed by using any words, even by him who had come forward to deny it. This point will be clarified later in the book. There can be no disappearance of that inner nature. So these two verses are always used as a kind of consolation, that there is no real obstruction or no real loss of that true inner consciousness. I think we should come at least to verse 3, because the two are also very much connected. Jagatadi vibhedepi tat abhinne prasarpati nivartate nijaneva svabhavat upalabdrita. But we know in the whole of Indian spiritual psychology there are these four states: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the fourth, or the transcendent state. So the objection is that in certain states of consciousness, there is no awareness of that. So the objection is, in the state of waking, it is concealed by itself. So in his translation, please put into bracket that Spanda principle that Jaidev Singh has added. It's not in the text. And it's precisely that brevity, you know.
Page number 34?
34.
Page 34, verse 3. We know this brevity from the Upanishads, for example, you know, that the briefer, the more ancient the text is, the more brief and containing in that brevity and so many meanings. Jagat adi vibhedepi tat abhinne prasarpati. It says only tat. Tat. Even though differing states like waking, etc., occur, in which, however, it remains identically the same, it's only it, that never departs from its own nature as the identical experience in all the differing states. So Spanda principle is added on the basis of the commentary. Nivartate nijan naiva svabhavat. You can also say it never withdraws from its own nature. It never, yeah. Tat. I love this brevity of the language, and then you can give it the meaning afterwards. But tat. Tattvam, but that reality, that now in the yogic psychology, of course, the closer you come to Turiya, the closer you are to that pure consciousness. That means the further away you are in the waking state, because in the waking state you are distracted by the external objects and sense impressions and so on. So that's where apparently you are away from that state, away from that consciousness. And even in Vedanta, which they say that Sushupti is very close to Samadhi. Yeah. Not in our system, but well, we have not only these four, but we have a fifth, and then we have, each one has four substates. You know, there's Jagat, Swapna, Jagat, Sushupti, Jagat, Turiya, and so on and so on. Abhinavagupta goes into all these details of different states, which I think is very easily, even psychologically explainable. We speak of daydreaming. So that is waking and dreaming combined. Jagat, Swapna, and so on. But the fifth state, which we don't call it fifth, we call it Turiyatita, beyond the fourth. It is actually, that's why it is not to be counted. It's not to be counted because it is not a particular state. It is that state which pervades all the others, once you have reached it. Which pervades all the others means also the waking state. Turiyatita. And that is, of course, from that highest level, there is no difference. But from that point of view of that Turiyatita, beyond the fourth. Because the fourth state, it is still counted because, like, you sit in Samadhi and then you are entering into the state of Turiya. But you get out of your meditation hall and start acting in the world, and again you are back into Jagat. So unless it becomes something so deeply internalized that you are not getting out of it, you remain in that. I still remember once I was in a very highly meditative state or something, and then I told somebody with whom I was very close, who was a highly advanced soul, I said, one doesn't feel like coming out. She said, why to come out? Don't come out. Sudita Satvariatita. So the objection is that the differentiation in the psychological states is because sometimes we are in the waking state and we are dreaming and we are sleeping, deep sleep, and then sometimes we are in samadhi. So in these different states there is a veiling of that reality, or that difference also applies to the difference of that consciousness. But he says no. Nivartate nijanaiva svabhavat upalapita. Svabhava. No, Shankara has been defined as svasvabhava, the true essential nature. So there is no withdrawing, no falling, no departing from that essential nature. And maybe in discussion with the Buddhists, I'm also very conscious about the Anatmavada, I have to say that these Kashmir Shaivites, they don't like the word Atma, because they are very conscious of the implications of making it something substantial. So they speak of Swarupa or Svaswarupa, Svasvabhava, it's something, it's one's true nature. But there's nothing substantial, it's not substantivized, which is the danger of the Atman in a certain Vedanta, against which the Buddhists have rightly objected, because it's as if some substance is there. But Svasvabhava, it is always something dynamic, it's that own essential being. There are other expressions, I'm sure, also in Zen Buddhism, but they speak of the true face, the original face, and so on.
Even Buddha nature in Tibetan Buddhism? Buddha nature.
Yeah.
In Tibetan Buddhism, Buddha nature.
Yeah.
Like a Buddha Swarupa.
Yeah.
It's very similar.
So here you don't find Atma. You find Svasvabhava, Swarupa, etc. And this Swarupa, Svabhava, it implies always the experiential aspect. It cannot be separated from experience. And that's why it says Sva, the three ways of knowing is Agama, Sva Anubhava, one's own experience. And only by Svanubhava can one touch that Swarupa, Svasvarupa. And of course, in the third is reasoning, because the two first, they have to be established by reasoning, explanation, and so on. So that's a philosophical part.
Did you say Sva Anubhava?
Sva Anubhava, yes, Sva Anubhava, yeah. No, thank you very much. A little bit from the commentary. Acha, I think I forgot one thing. I spoke about vritti corresponding to Madhyama, but I have not read the vritti of Bhakta Kalata. This is so short that one can easily add it. So in Mark's book there are two translations, apart from the other which I'm not going to quote, but the Spanda Vritti by Kalata and the Spanda Vivritti by Rajanaka Rama. Rajanaka Rama was a disciple of Utpaladeva, and he was also responsible for collecting the Shiva Sutravali and putting it into order. And so they were, he was a disciple of Baladeva, and Kalata was a disciple of Vasugupta. So as we have seen, the vritti is always a very short commentary. So the vritti to the second verse is, how can we say that Shiva is one's own essential nature, svasvabhava, subject as it is to transmigration? If asked this question, we would reply that that in which this universe is established and from whence it arises is never obscured, even during the round of rebirths. Thus it is nowhere subject to limitation, and so it is said to be Shiva. This is very brief. And the third one, I think the introduction, I'm sorry that I'm mixing these commentaries, but I think it is helpful. Because reading the entire Spanda Nirdaya of Kshemaraja is not possible. But these short commentaries, they are helpful. Now, introducing the third verse, Rajaranakarama, he writes the following, which gives the whole background. Now, must one accept the existence of this principle, Padartha, here called own nature, and that it is such as we have said it is, solely on the basis of scriptural authority? Or can its existence be admitted on the basis of sound reason and personal experience? You see, always the three, agama, sva-anubhava, and tarka or yukti, or upapatti. The argument advanced in the following verse to counter this doubt can be introduced as follows. The root cause of the knot of division so hard to sever is the ego, aham pratyaya. Now here we get a whole psychology. Root cause of all division is the ego, it's the limited ego, aham pratyaya. It is a state of subjectivity projected onto its object, namely the body, etc. So the identification of the ego with the body, the mind, the sense organs, etc. The development of this embodied egoity amounts to a fall from one's own most authentic nature, svabhava, the true subject, paramartika. It afflicts every single conscious subject overcome by the power of Maya that extends its sway as the darkness of the great illusion of duality. Maya is destroyed and deprived of all essence, like a mound of snow touched by the rays of the sun, when one reflects on one's own essential nature, svasvabhava, guided by that most excellent insight, prajna, which has become firm and unwavering through a profound understanding of the meaning and reality this entire treatise seeks to expound. See, the whole point here is raised that you have to move from this limited ego to the true essential nature. In order to distinguish the I notion, which is one's own true nature, from the body and the rest of the psychophysical organism, and so enable us to perceive that perfectly unconditioned reality of which he spoke before, the Master says, introducing a sound argument validated by personal experience to support his teaching. So that's the introduction to this verse. And then the vritti to this verse 3 says, even while perceiving distinctions among the forms of consciousness brought about by waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, his authentic nature is never obscured. This is because in all three states the perceiving subjectivity is the same. His nature does not change, just as poison pervades all 5 parts of a toxic plant, including its sprout. The example is very funny.
On page 86. On page 86. Yeah.
Yeah.
Verse 17. Verse 17. It says, the fully enlightened has...
36.
86.
It's 17. Page 86, yes.
Yeah.
The fully enlightened has always and incessantly the undeviating knowledge of the self in all the three states. The other one, who is the partially enlightened, has it only at the beginning and end of each stage.
Yeah. Well, this will come. This will come in a later sutra, which is
all three states.
Yeah. Now it will come later, but we can, since the commentary takes it, there is a special verse on that. The difference between the enlightened one and the fully enlightened one is the enlightened one, he experiences that spanda at the beginning and end of any state. And the fully enlightened one, he experiences it throughout. Now, beginning and end, we had it in the Vijnana Bhairava. I think most of you have done Vijnana Bhairava. Because whether it's the beginning of the breath arising, breathing in or breathing out, the beginning point, or the beginning point of any experience, any emotion, any sensation, any sense of perception. So that beginning point, and this is of course one of the most central spiritual practices of the entire school. This is called Pratama Bhasa, and there are different words for that. The awareness of the beginning point. So this is actually the secret of this whole practice. Awareness of the point of origin. And that is something which can be practiced, which can be, of course, awareness has to become more and more subtle, and then to become aware of that point where something arises. And why does he give this very funny sounding example where for the first time the word spanda comes in verse 22? Atikuto parishto va kim karomi iti varmachan. In a state of extreme anger. Why does he start with anger? But because in the state of anger, so much of emotion gets together that it's easier to get at the point of its origin. See, very soft emotions, you're not so, it's not so easy to go to the point of its origin. But when you get really angry in some situation, and suddenly you catch yourself in that moment, it is something so strong that it's easier to go back than in any other gentle emotion or something where you don't really find that point. It's not easy to find that point. So that's why I think psychologically he gives that example. Atikulta parishtova kim karomi iti varmasham. So it's one of the most famous verses of the Spanda Karika, which summarizes the whole of the Vijnana Bhairava. Because Vijnana Bhairava is, of course, that scripture, that agama on which it is based. And the beautiful thing is, that was not in the Vijnana Bhairava, that is specific to the Spanda Karika. It's not only being extremely angry or extremely happy, but being in a state of uncertainty. What should I do? Kim karomi iti varmasham. So a state of, indecision. We know in our life, sometimes we suddenly got the wrong bus or something, So kim karomi. So in that state where you're lost, what should I do now? But in that state, your mind is emptied from other thoughts, and you're so so emptied that you enter into that state of Spanda. So I like this expression very much. We will come to that. Verse 22. Just be patient. We have to. Please tell me if it is too long with the text, and if you are getting tired, we can also stop at some point and then.
No, from my sister.
I know I have to pick up speed from tomorrow, but.
On an average, you should do 5-6.
Huh?
On an average, you should do at least 5 to 6 verses.
Yes.
Because of the day, so
No, you're right.
But her exposition will not be available so much.
Yes, fully right. And of course, maybe we take the end of the commentary, which is also very beautiful, because in the light of a non-dual system, who is there? Who is the separate subject? Is there any separate subject? No. That separate subject would be exactly that ego identified with the body, etc. That is the separate subject. Otherwise, for Tat Abhine follows God's power of accomplishing even what is not within the range of possibility, inasmuch as the Lord manifests the differing states of waking, etc. In the manifestation of that difference itself, He manifests His identity. Thus He flashes forth in difference by His power of apara, in identity by His power of para, in the form of identity in diversity by His power of parapara. These are the three main Shaktis. Thus it is God Himself who is manifest in the unparalleled Trika principle. From the mystic point of view, this verse teaches that He is Shankara Himself, who even when remaining in the different states of waking, etc., constantly contemplates this identical nature of Himself, and thus experiences Himself as the ever-present experient. Now, experient is what here? Atascha jagara adi tasha avasthito iti evam imam svasvabhavam parishilayan yash chinute sa shankara eva iti upadishtam bhavati. It is Shankara who observes his own nature, svasvabhavam parishilayan. This is beautiful. It is Shankara who observes his own nature. So we are thinking that we are waking, we are sleeping, we are dreaming, and so on. But it is that divine subject who observes his own nature in us and through us. And this is the beauty. It is not the moment we always consider ourselves as separate. And then this whole trouble starts, as he said in the introduction. But in all the states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are just examples. As we say, there are so many states, so many possible states. But in all the states, it is Shankara who observes his own nature. That's beautiful. In all the states, you see, even in what you experience in your work, it doesn't matter which kind of level of consciousness, but it is Shankara who observes his own nature. Svasvabhavan parishilayan. Sashankara. Yes, I promise to be quicker from tomorrow. And no, of course, I'm also most interested in the verses which are concerning the practical part. This is, I mean, it's also related to practice, but it's more the whole background. And I think from tomorrow we can proceed more fast. Yeah.
Will we be coming close to some sort of a method to understand what we're hearing right now? Is there a technique, a meditation?
Yes.
And when will we approach that?